Loughlin and her husband, Massimo Giannulli, will serve prison time for their involvement in that college admissions scandal. Fox 5 legal analyst Wendy Patrick joining us now to explain how that sentence came to be. Wendy, good morning.
Good morning, Raul.
Okay, so Lori sentenced to 2 months in prison as expected. Giannulli was sentenced to 5 months. Why the discrepancy there?
Well, the discrepancy, Raul, is because her husband was, as we call in the criminal sphere, the heavy, meaning he was more culpable, he had more contact with the school, with the facilitator, etc. And just to remind our viewers, this is that notorious Operation Varsity Blues that broke last year when you saw all of these parents that were basically buying and bribing their way into colleges for their kids, whether it was having their children pose as athletes in sports they didn't play, as was the case here, having somebody else take SAT scores, and a variety of other different things. And it's apt that we're talking about it today, Raul, because I know that many parents just spent the weekend dropping off their lovely sons and daughters at the colleges of choice, so proud of them for not only applying, but getting in to the places they wanted to go. The real victims in the case of Lori Loughlin and her husband is the students that were denied spots that were falsely taken and unfairly taken by other students.
Yeah, the students who earned their way into college as it should be. So we all know the story. People were kind of surprised how they weren't really making a plea deal. They were going to defend themselves. They're saying, no, 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 no. And then what happened to Felicity Huffman, I think, made them go, wait a minute, she's going to jail for 2 weeks. Why the change in the plea? Why the change of heart? Something happened along the way that said, uh-oh, we're just going to stop this right now.
Great questions, Raul, because remember that this has been going on for close to a year. So Lori Loughlin and her husband, believe it or not, are number 23 and 24 on the list of folks that have pled guilty that have been charged. At the very beginning, remember, Felicity Huffman ran to the court and threw herself on the mercy of the court and ended up with 2 weeks. We all remember that. So that's kind of bookended by Lori and her husband, who held out. Many described them as defiant, didn't want to plead guilty. Can't penalize them for that. But what's happened in the meantime? You have a number of people that have been pleading guilty. You have the mastermind, William Singer, singing to prosecutors. Remember, he pled guilty right away as well. So you have to believe that behind the scenes, they were able to work out a deal with prosecutors. We know that because that's what was represented in the courtroom. But Raul, I also have to say that you bring up a very good point about the leniency, the perceived leniency, at least in this sentence. It could have been up to 20 years. This was a case that came in like a lion, but went out like a lamb.
Sure.
All of those 20-year potential sentences were reduced down to a matter of months for so many of the defendants. So while the tongue lashing that the judge gave Lori Loughlin in court last Friday, we'll call it a glam slam, didn't translate, the words didn't follow, the actions didn't follow those words because she only got 2 months. Now, it's true Felicity Huffman only got 2 weeks, but there's a lot of differences between these cases, and a judge can't very well say, we're going to throw the book at this celebrity couple when we gave similarly situated defendants a far linear sentence.
Well, I was going to ask you, they were facing 20 years. They end up with 2 months. And it's just a matter of, you said it all. It came in like a lion, went out like a lamb. That usually happens when these plea deals, and people really don't like these plea deals because they feel like somebody's getting away with something. So why do that if the point is to say, hey, don't ever do this again? Because my next question was going to be, okay, so other parents in the future, are they not going to do it now or are they?
Well, let me give you a couple of perspectives here just to make it interesting. So it is true that custodial sanctions are a great deterrent. That's why we use them. There are lots of other types of sanctions that we give to white-collar criminals in addition to time behind bars. There's reputational sanctions.
Sure.
I mean, when you talk about celebrities being penalized for crimes involving dishonesty in particular, I know we like to say, oh, they'll be forgiven in Hollywood. That doesn't always happen, and if it does, it doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah.
There'll also be monetary sanctions. Remember, Lori was ordered to pay $150,000, her husband $250,000, and that is on top of the, wait for it, $500,000 they paid to Singer to get their students in, to get their 2 daughters in as crew recruits when they never played the sport. Boy, that's got to be nerve-wracking on the first day of practice when you've never rode crew and you're showing up as a new player.
I have a question about those fines, though, because for Giannulli to get a $200,000 or $300,000 fine is like, they're slapping you with a $12 fine. It's not going to hurt them at all. So how do they determine the amount? Is it just general for everybody, or do they take, because it seems like that's not really going to do him any harm, really.
It's not general for everyone, because you have to tailor, and this is one of the things judges have to do. They have to tailor a sentence both to the crime and to the criminal.
Okay.
You also have to tailor it based on respective levels of accountability. And when you also have to make sure, like I said before, that it's not unduly onerous with one defendant where you've let somebody who did almost the same type of thing get away with a far lesser fine. Let me throw in one more wild card factor that we have now with the parents that are pleading guilty. We can't impose a pandemic sanction. In other words, we can't expose them to the virus when we are in a state where we're letting, even sometimes, sadly, violent criminals or serious criminals out of custody. We can't then say, well, now white-collar criminals are going to be getting a larger sanction than that. It's hard to predict in this case how that factored in. I can only say this: their report date is November 19th, just in time for Thanksgiving. If they show up at the institutions where they're supposed to be serving their sentences, only to be faced with an outbreak, have me back to say what's going to happen then, because it's questionable whether a virus sanction is among the types of even celebrity justice that a judge wants to impose in this case.
Look at that. Isn't that something? I mean,
sign of the times.
I mean, exactly. I mean, if there's any timing involved in this, and it's just unbelievable. I was wondering, are there other parents still yet to be sentenced in this? And can they expect pretty much the same thing? Everybody's just going to make their plea deal?
Well, what's so interesting about your question, Raul, is it is true. I have been mentioning this consistency in sentencing out of a matter of fairness, but it's also true that this scheme was not a one-size-fits-all, because each one of those kids had special circumstances that the parents took into account, and that this facilitator, Singer, took into account in deciding how to get into college. So a judge is going to look at all of that. But the kinds of sanctions in terms of custody, those have been pretty low across the board. I think the defendant that got the most was only 9 months. In addition to the fines, in addition to the other reputational sanctions, and obviously there's other sanctions that come along with being a convicted felon, there are also community sanctions. Now, don't expect to see Lori in an orange vest picking up trash on the side of the freeway.
Come on.
But she is going to have to do some type of community service, as is her husband. They'll probably choose some philanthropy or other sort of charity. But there isn't, and they'll be on supervised release. You know, it is also really embarrassing for these public figures to have pretty much, at least at this point, lost everything, including future earning potential, which goes to your good point about whether or not it is a slap on the wrist financially.
Aunt Becky in an orange jumpsuit on the side of the street? Come on now. Wendy Patrick?
We're not going to see it.
Thank you so much. That's why we have internet memes, I guess. Thanks, Wendy.